Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening if you are in Jerusalem. My name is Nathan Diamond, and I'm the executive director for the Orthodox Union Advocacy Center. And we're very pleased today to be joined by our good friend, and in my case, candidly, Mishpacha, Ambassador David Friedman, who, as you all know, was the United States ambassador to Israel in the last administration. David recently published a book entitled Sledgehammer, which is a memoir of his time in that post, which was an incredibly impactful tenure. We're very pleased at the OU Advocacy Center to have partnered with David, as we have with prior ambassadors and administrations, for the welfare and security in the state of Israel. And it was a remarkable time, and there's some really great stories and insights in David's new book. So we're pleased to provide this opportunity for more than 100 of you in OU leadership to hear a little bit of a conversation with David and some reflections, and I actually think some new insights, at least for me, and I'm sure for other readers, that came out of this book. So we're going to jump right into a conversation. Hello, David. How are you? How are things in Jerusalem?
Hi, Nathan. How are you? Well, things are always special here in Jerusalem, so it's great to be here.
Thank you so much. So let me start where you start at the beginning of the book, which is before you became ambassador. Obviously, when you first got to know then businessman, not yet President Donald Trump, and in the course of your describing that, you actually write in the book. I wrote this down. That on almost all levels, Donald and you have nothing in common except devotion to family. And you don't spend a lot of time on this point, but I thought it'd be very interesting for the OU audience to hear a little bit more about, what more can you sort of flesh out there as coming from, an observant Orthodox Jewish background, and engaging in a relationship and building a relationship with, as you say, someone you did not really have much at all in common with.
Well, look, we had different lifestyles. We had different approaches to life. We had different priorities. We had some different values. I had I've had one very, very special wife for 40. I hope I get this right, for 41 years. And I think we're approaching 42 now. And, live a life of, if you live and I try to, I don't pretend to be a paradigm for religious observance, but if you try to hold true to Jewish values, I mean, it's a lifestyle primarily of faith, of family, of study. It's although this is sometimes observed in the breach, it's not supposed to be a lifestyle of conspicuous consumption. You're not supposed to show off. I mean, some of us do sometimes, but we're not supposed to. And and Donald Trump was a larger than life character. He was always a showman, a salesman, a entrepreneur, a media personality. He had obviously several marriages to some, high profile wives. He was always in the news. He sought out the attention of, with regard to his lifestyle and what he was able to purchase and to consume. And, so yeah, I mean, look, we're very, very different people. And as I point out in the book, though, he did have this extraordinary capacity to, to be impactful in business on the strength of his personality. I didn't think in those days he would ever be a politician, but I did see, from time to time, if I needed something from him, if I needed him to make a phone call to somebody who was sick, if I needed him to do something that was, kind of, a mitzvah, some kind of good deed, he would do it. And there were some better angels on his shoulder. And then there were some worse ones that I always felt that, my relationship with him was in part about appealing to the better angels.
But did you did it present the difference you described? Did it present any difficulty, so to speak, in building a working relationship? I mean, ultimately, obviously, you had a close one, but
No, I mean it was largely a professional relationship. It was one that, as I point out in the book, I had success in representing him. I think beyond what I might have predicted going in, beyond what my capabilities probably were. I mean, I just had these outsized outcomes for him that forced a very strong bond professionally, which somehow also bled into social matters. I mean, the most impactful conversation I had with him was when I was sitting shiva for my father, and he came in a blizzard to pay a shiva call, and no one else was there, so we sat and talked for an hour, and I got to know him a lot better. And we had, if you look at, if you envision sort of concentric circles, the overlap was small, but it was meaningful, and that's where and that's where I think the relationship sat that enabled me to be impactful as an ambassador.
Thank you. That's very interesting. So jumping ahead, to his own and most other people's surprise, Mr. Trump wins the presidency, and you asked to be appointed ambassador to Israel, and he indeed appoints you ambassador to Israel. It was historic in any number of ways, including the fact that I'm not even sure if all the cabinet secretaries have been appointed, but at the point that you were appointed the ambassador to Israel. And you spend a little bit of time in your book about talking about your confirmation process, and opposition that you had from some elements of the Jewish community, and that it was a very partisan environment. So almost all the Democrats, save two, Bob Menendez and Joe Manchin, opposed you. I'd be curious to know, as you once you were confirmed and you were doing the work, did you find any of those folks who had voted against you over the course of the work came around, and even if they presumably, as partisan Democrats, still did not like President Trump and the administration in general, were you able to have collaborative working relationships with some pro-Israel Democrats on the Hill?
Well, I think so. Those discussions would have been primarily in the context of Democrats visiting Israel. Where they would come to Israel to visit, and many Democrats came to visit over the years. Look, I came to respect some of those who voted against me. I very much differently than I would have expected. I came actually to enjoy my conversations with Tim Kaine. I thought he was actually a very intelligent and perceptive guy who I thought was trying to get it right. We would disagree, but I thought he wanted to get it right. I'm a fan of Chris Coons. I think he's got a good heart. His objectives are clearly to support the state of Israel. Again, may disagree on tactics, but in a civilized, respectful way. I mean, look, there are some good Democrats. I hate to paint with a broad brush. So look, there's some stark differences. Bipartisanship is important. It's important, certainly for your organization to cultivate that, and others. My view is, I'm not going to die on the hill of bipartisanship if it means diluting my pro-Israel agenda sufficiently to the point where we're no longer doing meaningful things. So that was but politics is a rough and tumble game, and I learned it. I tried to learn it quickly because I had to jump into a very political environment.
Well, one of the things that's been interesting in the change of administrations is that I'm sure you've heard and I've heard the current ambassador, Tom Nides, President Biden's ambassador to Israel, say many times that even if he might disagreed with you on some particular policy initiatives, and he does not disagree with you on all of the things that you pursued, he very quickly says that you really set the benchmark as being an incredibly impactful ambassador in terms of the record of accomplishment. And So at least that kind of recognition is bipartisan, so to speak.
I met him. I met Tom today for the first time.
Oh,
I had lunch with him. I had lunch with him today. I never met him before. I spoke with him on the phone before. You know, all politics aside, he's a delightful guy. We had a wonderful, we really had a fun lunch, and you know, and he totally gets my point of view, and I get his point of view, and you know, we said some things that I won't, you know, that are between us, but you know, certainly from the perspective of, you know, is his heart in the right place? Sure, he really wants to strengthen the U.S. Israel relationship. Is he going about it the same way I would? Of course not. But you know, but you know, we did have a good conversation.
that's good to hear. That's good to hear. Um, Going back to, while you were ambassador, there's a very interesting passage in your book, and I think you made some news with it. I know there were some news articles about it, about a certain point at which you described President Trump as having some real reservations about Prime Minister Netanyahu, and whether or not, I don't have the quote in front of me, but basically President Trump says something like, "I don't think Bibi is really interested in peace with the Palestinians
Right.
altogether." And you, as was reported and as in your book, you put together a mixtape, so to speak, a videotape of some terrible things that the Palestinian leadership said about Jews and about terrorism and things like that, um, and that swayed President Trump's views. But could you maybe fill out that story a little bit more about that episode?
Look, you know, in the early days, this was in early 2017. I had just gotten appointed, and look, the truth is that, you know, everybody's got an opinion on Israel. I mean, it's just one of those subjects that lots of people have points of view on. And somebody that was close to the president, not in government but knew him well, you know, was absolutely convinced that Abu Mazen was ready to make peace. He was ready to walk away from all of Jerusalem. He was willing to give up on refugees. He was willing to minimize his territorial claims. And this person, I think well-meaning, said to the president, "Look, you're going to win a Nobel Prize here. It's yours for the taking. You just got to push Bibi. Bibi's the problem. You got to push Bibi into making peace." Now, you know, that was a point of view given to the president. It was wrong. It was 180 degrees wrong. Abbas was not willing to do any of those things. Bibi was not diametrically opposed to the idea of peace, but that was the president's view, and now he's coming to Israel. And I want him to have the facts, at least as I perceive them. I'm not going to mislead him. I'm not going to tell him things that aren't true. But, you know, I wanted to be able to get to him in a relatively short amount of time, something which would show him that, you know, Abu Mazen is, in many respects, an apologist for terrorists. I would say in some respects worse than that. He's someone who uses terrorism to suit his agenda, but he keeps it off to the side and he tries to be the good cop, but he controls the bad cops, and he's no friend of peace, and he's no peacemaker. I had the Israelis put together kind of a 2-minute clip on the worst things he said. I've made it clear it's got to be intellectually honest. Nothing can be taken out of context. Nothing can be subject to multiple interpretations. And when the president came to Israel, we were in a room, and I suggested that Netanyahu play the tape, and the president saw it, and he was moved by it. The next day, he went to Bethlehem to visit Abbas, who he had already seen in Washington, and he really, he gave him hell. He said, "You know, who are you? Are you the guy that came to me in Washington, you know, like a elderly statesman, you know, wanting to make peace for your people? Or are you this bloodthirsty terrorist? And by the way, why isn't Friedman here?" To which he said, "Well, you know, why did you disinvite Friedman? I mean, I rely on his advice. Why can't I bring him with me?" And he says, "Well, Friedman's the ambassador to Israel. We're not in Israel right now, in Bethlehem." You know, and so look, the president's view changed, and it didn't change for the good or for the bad. It changed for the truth. And you know, as I point out in the book, a month or two later, I was in Washington, and I got my head chopped off by Tillerson and McMaster. They were furious. You know, I didn't really understand.
Secretary of State Tillerson and National Security Advisor McMaster. Nope.
Correct. And you know, I don't think I even understood when I was doing this how controversial it was. But you know, they said to me, this is a cheap propaganda trick to play a video for two heads of state without clearing it with the secretaries of state or the staff. I mean, how could you do that? And I said, look, I thought the president was heading down the wrong path. I needed him to be well informed, and my job is to keep the president informed. And if you're not happy, I'm sorry if you're not happy, but I don't work for you guys. I work for the president. And that's sort of how we kind of set the working parameters between all of us. I mean, I worked for the president. I worked closely with Garrett. We were colleagues, but I worked for the president. I had one person to whom I was obligated, which is, by the way, the law. That's the way ambassadorships actually work. Most ambassadors kind of cower in fear in the State Department, want to be accepted. But I work for the president, and
most ambassadors don't have the direct cell phone of the president, so you had a little bit of a competitive advantage there.
Yeah, and by the way, that is in the short the one sentence description of my job is I had a close relationship with the president, and I was able to deploy that relationship for what I think and many people think was the good of Israel and the good of the United States. Without the president's support, no matter how clever I might be or strategic I might be, I couldn't have gotten any of these things done.
But I'm curious though, the thought that occurred to me in reading about that episode and you describing it again about his skepticism about Bibi and then watching the tape is, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way. I mean, politicians, and Mr. Trump became a politician, right? So politicians change their views and don't necessarily have, firm commitments on all kinds of things, and they get swayed and moved. What did you take away from that episode or others, if anything, about, what really does Donald Trump, so to speak, believe about Israel?
Look, it should make it clear that while Donald Trump has, I believe, done more for Israel than any other president, Donald Trump did not run on a pro-Israel platform. He ran on a domestic platform to make America great again. It was mostly based on tax reform and closing the border and, empowering energy. That's what was, so, let's not, I don't want to overstate the case of Donald Trump's, personal beliefs with regard to Israel. He had a general view that Israel was to be respected because of all it accomplished in a tough neighborhood, and he had a view that the American people, by and large, supported Israel, and he had a general view that Israel was an important ally and was on the right side of the issues that he cared about. But he was not someone who got up in the morning and went to sleep at night thinking, how can I help Israel? I mean, that's what I did. And what the way this clicked was I would be able to make the case to him in a way that he understood that it was good for Israel, good for America. And I think, we had a lot of mutual trust. And I had others on the team. I mean, there whether it was Jared or Jason or Pompeo later on, a very, very strong group of people working together that supported Israel as being in the best interests of American security and American prosperity. So he assembled a team that was very pro-Israel. He was very receptive to a pro-Israel agenda. But where he considered his job to be was to protecting and making more prosperous the American people.
So jumping ahead, right, later, toward the end of the administration, when the president unveiled the vision for peace and the proposal, which was a bold and historic proposal for a whole variety of reasons, but literally, right, in the minutes after it was revealed, there was something of a controversy, something of a split, because Prime Minister Netanyahu understood it or was interpreting it as he could declare sovereignty in Judea and Samaria that day. And that was clearly, it seemed from the accounts, right, that was neither the president's view nor, for that matter, Jared's view. So am I correct in understanding, right? That ties into what you were just describing, right? The President Trump had some broad ideas, but he didn't have a particular view about Beit El or Eli or anything else. And
No, no, no. And I think, and look, I think, we had that unfortunate disconnect, which actually ended up being, I think, a fortunate disconnect because, um, look, I'm no secret that I do believe that it's in Israel's interests to, on its own. I mean, I think Israel. I think what's best for Israel its longest border has for 50 some odd years, been subject to no national consensus, and it's not because there isn't one. It's because they haven't sought to develop it and to make the case to the world. And I think Israel should be moving forward, in a deliberate way to set its eastern border. Here we were talking about Israel recognizing sovereignty over some parts of Judea and Samaria and America moving forward with it. And we had a disconnect on the timing. I explained it in the book. It was really we had a different understanding as to how long it would take to do that within the Israeli internal procedures. It turned out that while places like Beit El and Eli could not have been the subject of an immediate turning on the switch for internal Israeli reasons, Begat HaYarden, the Jordan Valley, could have been done that day. And we didn't understand that it was that soon. And so it created a couple of very difficult weeks. There was some friction. I think, Netanyahu felt that he had one understanding. Jared felt another. I was in the middle trying but we got past it. I mean, the important thing is that not only did we get past it, but we got past it with, I think, a very strategic and clever way of moving forward, that we were going to move forward with the sovereignty agenda. But we also recognized, because as this was happening, we were getting, the Saudis that had been wed to the Arab Peace Initiative, which they wrote for a generation, which is on one page. All of a sudden, the Saudis come out and say, this is a good plan, even though the Palestinians want to rip it up. And the Saudis say, this is a good plan. I think America should continue to supervise. Now, remember, this is a plan which gives, in which not a single home in Yudav Shomron, not a single Jewish home is evacuated. And not only do the Jews remain in Yudav Shomron in their communities, but they have room to expand. So, and the Saudis are saying, this is a good first shot. Let's keep it going. The Emiratis were saying the same thing. Morocco was saying the same thing. 4 or 5 countries in the EU were telling us that. So we're moving on a sovereignty program, but a lot of these countries are saying, look, we're with you. We just slow down a little bit on the sovereignty. So we're not sure where this is all going, but we're on a path where, we're either going to, move forward and end up with some historical territorial recognition with regard to Judea and Samaria, or we're going to put it off for a while. We're not going to cancel it. We're not going to say we're not doing it, but we're going to put it off, and we're going to get, what became the Abraham Accords. And so, I wasn't sure which way it was going to head, but, I sort of felt we're heading in the right direction. And in the end, the question is who's going to jump in and say, yeah, go ahead.
No, I want to come back to the Abraham Accords in a minute, but just before we get to that, I think it's pretty clear, and you said it, that a core, if you wanted to really describe the approach that you all took, leading up to that moment where you sort of transitioned to the Abraham Accords, and in a sense the underlying the subtitle of your book, How Breaking with the Past Brought Peace to the Middle East, is you and your colleagues threw out all the conventional wisdom that animated, what might have been called the peace process industry in Washington for decades.
Sure.
What the sequencing was, right? You couldn't deal with other Arab countries until you solved the Palestinian issue. That land for peace was the central issue, and all these different things. And there were many, the OU among them, and many, many others who for a very long time said, that's all nonsense. But you all were able to actually be the scientific experiment, so to speak, of showing that the alternative hypothesis. I'm curious to know. There are some people who had been for years and years involved in the peace process, who are good people and who have some intellectual honesty. I'm curious to know, just like I asked you before, what happened afterwards with some of those Democratic politicians. I would not expect everybody who had dedicated decades to the old version of the peace process to sort of say, hey, you guys did some good stuff, but some folks must have. And you don't need to name names, but like, what insights can you give us into?
Look, some of I would divide these experts into two groups. One are the true experts who see this as evolving and are open-minded and are happy to have honest conversations. And you could probably figure out who they are. And then there are those who are very parochial about their role and think that anybody who hasn't been doing this for 30 years has no right even getting into the discussion. And again, you can just go back and look on Twitter and figure out who's who. But so look, we brought in a bunch of people who were involved in this from the past, got their thoughts. Their primary view was that, look, it's very creative, but the Palestinians are never going to take it. Okay, and we knew that anyway. So I mean, that wasn't really much of a newsflash for us. We knew the Palestinians weren't going to take it. Why did we do it anyway? Did it anyway for a couple of reasons. Number one, we demonstrated that the Israelis want peace. We demonstrated that the Israelis are willing to give up territory for peace. We also demonstrated that you'd have to be crazy to make peace with the Palestinians until they reform. I mean, I ask my friends on the left all the time, the Palestinian Authority, forget about Hamas, which everybody agrees. I mean, no one has an answer to Hamas right now, right? Which is obviously a massive impediment to any peace deal with the Palestinians. Palestinian Authority has no real system of justice. It's a capital offense if you broker a sale of land from a Arab to a Jew. They have they are extraordinarily misogynistic. They outlaw homosexuality is illegal in the Palestinian Authority. I tell my friends on the left, you want to put your fingerprint on that Palestinian state? I mean, is that really what you want to work so hard to do, to create a Palestine? I mean, so the difference between, I think, the left and the right on this, and it's not just me versus Martin Indyk, but it's we actually see things for what they are, and not for we don't do aspirational plans and put people's lives at risk based upon a naked promise that things will be better. I mean, we understand you can't do that. So we don't believe in gadgets and gizmos along the Jordan Valley, to warn Israelis in the event of an attack from the east, when every military person that I know says Israel's got to be in the Jordan Valley to defend itself. We don't we don't give the Palestinians a free pass when they have no system of justice, and the likelihood is that they're going to continue to be corrupt and make their people so miserable that there'll be a revolution and somebody else will come in. We want to know who we're dealing with. We don't think of Abu Mazen. We think Abu Mazen's not long for this world, and somebody else will come in. So we just sort of recognize the realities, and we recognize primarily that that the Palestinians have no ability to control Hamas, that they're corrupt, they're tribal, they're not unified. And so Israel is really in this part, unlike with Gaza, where it was a huge mistake to get out, but it wasn't an existential mistake. Israel does not have a margin of error in Judea and Samaria. It makes a mistake and gives over this territory to the wrong people. It gets cut in half. So that's just the way we look at it. I mean, we will never ask Israel to take risks that no other country would take with regard to its own people. And the elites would like to there's this great they all say, well, you make peace with your enemies, not with your friends. And my response is, yeah, but you make peace with your former enemies, not your current enemies. Your current enemies you defeat. Your former enemies you can make peace with. And right now there are no former enemies right now to make peace with. They're all still enemies.
It is, and I would just add, we jumped over it. The historical relocation of the embassy to Jerusalem, was also a critical step in blowing up, dare I use that term, the conventional wisdom, that for decades folks had said, oh, that'll inflame the Middle East and so on and so forth. And importantly, it showed that, it didn't motivate the Palestinians to move off of where they're at, but it showed that, they just can't sit on their hands and not lose things, and wait for somebody else to deliver what they want on a silver platter with no concessions whatsoever.
I think it was the most important thing we did. And, we get most of our credit we get for the Abraham Accords, and happy to take credit wherever it comes. But it all got set in motion when we moved the embassy. we called the Palestinians bluff. They people thought that they could set the world on fire. Well, they didn't set the world on fire. Nobody was interested in following the Palestinians into battle here. And for one really significant reason, because everybody knows that Jerusalem's the capital of Israel. It wasn't like we were making this up. I mean, people aren't stupid. They know Jerusalem's the capital of Israel, both historically, both biblically, and practically in terms of how Israel runs its government. So doing that, people saw it. First of all, it became incredibly popular domestically, and people noticed that. The Palestinians, the veto was broken, and everybody, and the sun came up the next morning. And so from there, we had two things going for us. We had domestic politics was now being proven to be very pro-Israel, at least among the people that voted for the president. And more important, people.
He mentioned the embassy move in rally speeches where there were not many Jews present.
There were not many Jews present. I remember one in particular, Evanston, Indiana. I mean, 20,000 people. I doubt there were 5 Jews. The biggest applause line was the moving the embassy. And then the other thing was, we started to show the world, the region in particular, that America can be trusted. America could be a really, really good friend to its allies in the region. And the UAE recognized. I mean, the UAE is never going to have a relationship with the U.S. like the U.S. has with Israel. But the UAE says, you know what, we want to have that relationship too, where we're a trusted ally, where we join this circle of not just common interests, but real trust and reliability. And and Bahrain came in, and the Saudis are not there yet. They will be. I mean, assuming if we were still in power, they would be. And of course, you fly from Tel Aviv to Abu Dhabi, 90% of the flights over Saudi airspace, which was unthinkable 2 years ago. So it was really what we showed to our Gulf allies was that the relationship between the United States and Israel can be scaled beyond just the U.S. and Israel, with a common level of trust. And that really, more than anything, is what led to the Abraham Accords. These other countries wanted to be like Israel. They wanted to be with Israel in this relationship with the United States.
So of course, right, the Abraham Accords are also historic, and I know the UAE ambassador in particular likes to talk about how the work on their bilateral relationship has not slowed down at all. The relationship is getting deeper and wider. I'm sure that's true with the other countries as well. But everybody wants to know, okay, so who's next? You're not in government at the moment, but you're a close observer of these things. And what insight could you give us in terms of? And by the way, the Biden administration has said we love the Abraham Accords. We want to expand the circle also. Presumably they're a little bit preoccupied right now with Ukraine and some other things, to be fair. But what do you see from your vantage point of who and potentially when other countries might join the Abraham Accords circle?
Well, Nathan, right now, I think right now nobody's next. And the reason nobody's next is because of the way we're approaching Iran. I think the Saudis are furious. I think the Emiratis are furious. I mean, they won't come out and say it, but what I'm hearing from people is, and I think the Israelis can't be as furious because of the relationship that the Israeli government has with the U.S. government. So they're gonna try to be more, they're gonna try to figure out how to get through this thing. But giving Iran $200 billion is just an unthinkable outcome right now. But they will not use that money to build schools and build hospitals. And what the Biden administration has now signaled to the world is, if you're a nuclear power, we're just not going to get in your way. That's really the message of Ukraine, right? I don't want to start World War III. Well, America's not going to get into World War III if it provides arms to Ukraine, unless it provokes Russia to use nuclear weapons, even tactical nuclear weapons. And so the message, which is a ridiculous message, I mean, I'm just frustrated, beyond words. But the message that Biden is now giving the world is, look, if you're a NATO country and Article 5 is invoked, the United States will honor its pledge. By the way, I don't believe it. I don't believe the United States is going to war for Estonia or for Romania. I don't believe it, but that's what Biden is saying. But if you're not a NATO country and Article 5 is not invoked, we don't want to provoke World War III, which means that any country that attacks any of our allies that has nuclear capabilities, we're going to sit it out, or we're going to impose some sanctions or provide some weapons, maybe, but we're not going to war anymore. And that message is it's telling every country you're on your own, including Israel. And it is in terms of the Abraham Accords. Look, the Abraham Accords, in every case, every deal was different, but you always had Israel and a country that it was normalizing with at the base of the triangle, with the United States at the apex. Now, the United States would be doing different things with each country at the apex, whether it was giving, military assurances, giving diplomatic assurances, Sudan taking them off the terror watch. I mean, all kinds of things that were all appropriate in each case. But the U.S. was an active participant. These were all new relationships, and the United States had to nurture them and be active in them. And one of the factors was the fact that everybody was opposed to Iran. And we trusted, all these countries, including Israel, and trusted the United States that it would be opposed to Iraq. So where we are today, I don't know where it's going. I mean, I hear different things about whether they're close or not, or what. I think the Russian war has made it much more complicated. But this is a going back into JCPOA 2 will make it much harder to scale the Abraham Accords. And I hope it's temporary. I hope there's no deal. I hope it's temporary. But that's. Now, had we still been in power, Saudi Arabia was by far the big fish. They're the custodians of the Muslim holy sites. I think you'll make the case they're the leader of the Muslim world. That would have, I think, really in a meaningful way brought an end to the Arab-Israeli conflict as we have known it historically. And I think that'll still happen, but I think we're just going to take some more time. I don't think it's happening in the current environment. I just don't think the U.S. is providing enough assurances to these countries to get there, but I hope it changes.
We just have a couple minutes left, and I've tried to weave some questions that we got submitted ahead of time into my questions to you. I'm curious to know, going back to what the conventional wisdom was before your administration. So, it wasn't only Democratic administrations that pursued the peace process and the two-state solution and so on and so forth, right? George W. Bush had his Annapolis conference. George H.W. Bush convened Madrid, so on and so forth. Where do you see, let's put aside the question of whether or not Donald Trump is going to run for president again. I don't want to get into that. But, where do you see, as someone who has served in a Republican administration and is involved in Republican political and policy circles, where do you think that the Trump administration's approach has changed the trajectory of the Republican Party with regard to policy toward Israel and the Middle East in general, such that whoever comes next is going to be operating in a different framework than what came before the Bushes and Reagan, et cetera?
Yes, and I think that's one of the side benefits of the peace plan that we put out, because it is the only plan that has ever received the really unqualified endorsement of the Israeli security establishment, as well as Prime Minister Netanyahu. So why wouldn't you start there? In other words, you could make up something else that everybody's going to hate, but why not start with something that at least without, I mean, I'm sure there's things that have to be changed, but why not start from a place where your most important ally in the Middle East says, I'm willing to negotiate on this basis? I mean, to throw that out is crazy, because first of all, look, I'm not an expert on that many things. I am absolutely an expert on Israeli politics. I know where the country can go. I know where the Israeli people can go. Okay. We all saw what happened in 2005 in Gaza, almost a civil war, evacuating 8,000 people from a remote part of the country. you're not gonna get 100,000 Jews to leave the biblical heartland of the state of Israel or more. They're not leaving. They're not going, and Israel should not expose itself to that type of internal political turmoil. So let's start with what we got. We got something that kind of makes sense. I mean, the Palestinians will have a bigger footprint. They'll have a much better economy. They'll have infrastructure. They'll have a state in a hypothetical sense. They won't control their security or their airspace or their electromagnetic spectrum, or their borders, but they'll have as much, as this is Netanyahu's line. They'll have as much autonomy as does not threaten the state of Israel, and that's what this plan provides. And why not start there? And I think the Republicans are prepared to go there. I mean, everyone I talk to, and I talk to lots of potential future presidents, this is what makes sense to them. I mean, you want to call it a state? It's not a state. I mean, it's not a state as we think of a state, but you want to have something realistic, which gives the Palestinians more and better life without threatening Israel. This is the plan, and I think a lot of Republicans will embrace it in the future.
Well, it's been great talking with you. I don't know if you want to close out with any topics we have not touched on, but I'll give you a chance to do that.
Well, look, I'm not going to give up the opportunity. First of all, to say thank you for I was a lightning rod, among American Jews, and some organizations were supportive, and and some weren't, and those that were supportive, I deeply appreciate the support. It's not like I live on an island. I needed it at times, and I was happy to have it. So thank you for the support I got over the 4 years that I was in office. The second thing, Nathan, you've been doing this a long time. Where I think we're approaching a fairly precarious point in the both in the internal Jewish life in America, both because of the physical threats that we're facing and because of the assimilation that is rampant in the universities that will not present Israel fairly, and of course we have all these issues around the world that we didn't have last year. Just be, to you and everyone who's listening, I mean, be active. I mean, this is not the time to take a snooze. Be active. I mean, I endorse. I mean, I think I endorse all your points of view, and I'm happy that you're active and engaged. And I want to wish you great luck, great success moving forward. Because again, the OU needs to be heard right now.
Thank you very much. I'll use that as an opportunity to plug for those who are on. Well, you're probably on because you got our email invitation to this, but if not, go to advocacy.ou.org and sign up for our action alerts and be involved in all of our work, both in support of Israel's security and welfare, and also on key domestic policy issues. As the host, I will also say Sledgehammer is still available wherever you get your books. It's a good read, and really appreciate David, Ambassador David Friedman, for joining us this afternoon, and wish you all a great day and Erev Tov in Yerushalayim.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
It's good to be with you. Thank you.